So it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Pei, to the Coronavirus Multi-Species Reading Group. You've shared a number of really interesting videos. You've got this speculative cookbook that you've written from the vantage point of a future to come when we're kind of looking back, or maybe we is kind of the wrong pronoun there, but this speculative chef or cookbook curator is looking back, and I think it's an interesting departure from some other modes of engaging with the virus aesthetically, so early in the pandemic we engaged with the work of Caitlin Berggren, who is also doing art with viruses, making microbiopolitical calculations about what viruses are good to live with, and the sorts of circulation of matter and meaning that one might do that is attentive to the specificities of human health, but also promoting flourishing and multi-species worlds. But I think your art is a little more edgy, and it's a little more, you're engaging with pathogens and inviting people to, experience discomfort. And, if you push pause on some of those videos, like you're holding on to the cookbook and you haven't shared the whole thing with us, but we've been given little teasers and sneak peeks. And if you push pause on some of the frames, you can see that, the recipe not only involves ingesting viruses, but involves ingesting things like ipecac syrup to make you vomit alongside these things that you're eating. So maybe if you could just start out by, talking about your aesthetics and talking about, this isn't about necessarily a healthy living with, maybe it's a more destabilizing invitation to engage with virality. But at the same time, one of the projects is titled Virophilia, so the love of virus. So maybe if you could sort of hold those two things together, like what does virophilia look like in a situation where it's not necessarily about promoting health?
So actually, I got a lot of inspirations from the virologists that I'm working with. And I first started with engaging with those ones that make humans sick. But then gradually, all these virologists keep telling me like there are other viruses available in this world. And it was quite of my shock, I think. First, I was approaching this project from the point of view of, can we make something that's viral beneficial for human? And then I went to the virologist and he told me that, well, I study plant virology and there are probably 90% of the viruses are beneficial for their host. And we haven't been looking at it. It's because all this like funding of biology research is always like mostly funded for those that will harm people. So it has a health benefit. And as a result, that all the things that we see are the ones that cause harm instead of those that cause beneficial to their host. And then he started to give me this, because Netherlands has this history of researching in tobacco mosaic virus. The term of the virus was first named in the Netherlands. And they actually discovered that tobacco mosaic virus can make tobacco plants more durable to drought. And that's one of the examples. So the project sort of departed from there. I think it's really because of the scientist's view of the ecology that leads me to this perspective. And I guess it's also because it's not that common for the media to pick it up. So it feels a bit edgy for the people who are not in the biology research. But if you're really looking at it, like, this beneficial relationship has been a very common topic in ecology and the study of this network of living beings. So yeah, so I guess that's how it come to this part. Yeah. And
Super interesting. And
yeah.
And maybe just slow down there. You're going a little fast over the tobacco mosaic virus. So like the history of it, I guess, is that, virus used to just mean poison, and it was something that was passing through the filters for bacteria. And then gradually they isolated it with this first experiment that found this agent that was, they didn't know, was it a chemical or, some kind of biological living thing. But you said it makes the tobacco mosaic virus makes the plants what, resistant to drugs, or say that one more
Yes, so they have this like amazing experiment where they have the tobacco plants either infected by the mosaic virus or not, and by watering them with different frequency, and they discovered that the one got infected by the viruses are less likely to die, so they're more resistant to drought, and they can live like and make it more able to adapt to different environment basically. And that's quite surprising. And the virologist was telling me that he thinks that probably consists of 90% of the virus host relationship. Yeah. And then also it was from there that I start to learn that there are also viruses in our genome that being fossilized in a way that contribute to our functionalities of our body. That, for example, the formation of the placenta was by one of the virus. And if taking that virus genome out, there's no mammals. So this is like, it becomes very strange that if you think about the viruses as something that's external, but they are actually internal as well and playing a very crucial part of human life. So I was thinking of this like notion of like, we haven't seen this part, but if you look at it neutrally, then you discover that the relationship isn't that harmful. Then perhaps there are new possibilities that we can think of it. Yeah. So
super interesting. I mean, I think this tobacco mosaic virus example lets us think about the interplay of agency. And at the time when people were trying to cultivate tobacco to grow to like smoke, this virus was interrupting human enterprises and interrupting what humans desired. And I can't help but think about another Dutch viral plant story. The one that Michael Pollan tells about the tulips and the viruses that produce those, those colorful breaks. So I think the Netherlands has quite an interesting history of virology. Can you tell us more about what you've learned being there?
Well, I mean, it's really funny that all the tulips that you buy now is actually human bred. And it doesn't have the virus in there anymore, but it's also trying to mimic the pattern of how the virus was making it. And that pattern, like this stripe-like pattern, actually make it more favorable for people. And also there was the legend that you can buy a whole house with one bulb back in the time when they didn't know why it was causing it. So you see, like it's in our history, the virus has been contributing to the economy even in that sense. And there was also the Abutilon mosaic virus that grows on the Abutilon tree, and it creates the variegation on the leaves of Abutilon. And I think it was traveling maybe 19th century from South Africa to Europe, and it suddenly becomes so favorable for people. And that's also another one of the human virus relationship we had. So yeah, I would say, because when I was trying to write down the cookbook, it has to balance in between like how much in reality that it will really happen to make it more believable. And as I do more research, I found that the human virus relationships actually much more intimate than we thought, and just probably very often ignored, especially under the pandemic. That I know that a lot of people are thinking the viruses is something that's totally evil and it doesn't have other aspects. And what we are suffering right now are purely because of the virus instead of human virus interaction. So yeah, I guess this is like, I have the feeling that we haven't really studied our relationship with the virus deep enough as a general public so far. Yeah.
Super interesting. Sevgi, you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Pei-Ying. It's very, very interesting. I would like to ask you, I'm interested in traditional fermentation practices, and there are always viruses, all the microbes, all the diversity of the microbial worlds. It's dynamic relationship that we are having when we are producing food. It's inevitable, we are eating them as well. So I would like to ask you, have you ever thought to engage with traditional ways of cooks, food, particularly fermented one, which have much more diverse portfolio of not just viruses, all the microbes involved within?
Yeah, but then it's quite a bit of it sounds like a lifetime project.
So assume that fermented food won't be in the future.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, this cookbook also has references to what we already been doing with other microbes. So for example, there are chapters like we can use virus for fermentation, but the idea of fermentation is more at this moment more engaged with bacteria and yeast. And then it just because we haven't been able to control or to say that really perceive how the viruses are interacting with the living entity, like for example, plants or animals. That's why we haven't really thought about, well, it can also be fermentation.
Yes, and the point is that, do you think we need to know something to engage with, to sense with? Do you think we need to know the details? It's quite scientific view, actually. Maybe without knowing it, we can also engage and sense them.
I think probably, yeah, probably people are already doing it, just not knowing that it was caused by, like, what was the cause. And also, I think to some extent, the knowledge of how viruses function is still needed. Like, for example, the fact that it has to be used when they are living, for example. So how do you, I find one essence about fermenting, the idea of fermenting with a virus is that you will have to make sure that you monitor a living being's situation or the development of the living being when it's being infected by the virus, instead of having the living being chop up as materials and then see how it ferments. And it's also not that visible by eyes. You need a slightly indirect way of observing the changes. So I guess those kind of knowledge is needed, but maybe not a specific knowledge for a specific virus. But then I guess also it's a bit of a logic question, I guess. Like if you can observe the changes of something without knowing it, it's also not that easy to identify whether it was caused by the bacteria or the virus. So it's a bit tricky. Like I think to some extent, some knowledge with the virus is needed. And because it also has a very, I would say aesthetically, it has a very different essence than bacteria because it's so invisible. And I think that's the beauty of it. But then to be able to see something that's invisible needs some techniques. Yeah.
Maybe just slowing down with one recipe that kind of speaks to that question that we got a glimpse of. There was a kombucha recipe on there, and kombucha's kind of a classic, lately a hipster kind of fermented beverage. So could you tell us just about that particular recipe? And I think you called, was it Kombucha Mate is what you were calling the viral version in your cookbook?
They have that in the cookbook. I'm not sure. I think I probably only briefly mentioning it. Yeah, I think it was not.
I managed to push pause on one of the videos and I read the recipe. So there was a recipe in there for kombucha.
Yeah, I think it's probably not a whole recipe of it, but the way of using it. So one of the idea is to use the viruses to control things like kombucha, for example, or sourdough. And I think I have a more in-depth recipe for the sourdough. And the reason why using these is that, well, so all these fermentation is a mixed fermentation of different microbes and like bacteria and yeast. So you have a whole colony or colonies of different microbes in there. And what's fascinating about viruses is that if you put one kind of virus into a soup of different things, they are very good at attacking or aiming at a specific species in there and then either kill them or give them new functionalities or have interactions with them. And with human ourselves, you can never really you don't have any tools that to sieve it or to collect only certain species in there to manipulate them. But with a virus, you can just release them and they know where to look for. So with these mechanisms, you can actually to do more minor modification of the whole taste of the whole fermenting process. So for example, the suddenly forgot the English name, but the bacteria that makes the sourdough sour, for example, if you kill them, then it won't be so sour. And if you kill the yeast also has this special scent when it's being killed by the virus, and then it adds more scent, different scent, like a meat-like taste to the dough that it was fermenting. So one of the way using it is sort of to use the characteristic of the virus to manipulate or engage or making a shift of the whole colony in the whole fermentation process. Yeah.
Super interesting. And could you tell us a little bit more about some of the other viruses you selected for the cookbook? There's one point in the video where you show a very long list of viruses. And I think as we approach the virus here, I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, you know, how 90% roughly of plant viruses are good for plants. And, you know, as we approach this mind-boggling biodiversity of the biosphere, we need, I think, new stories and new creative ways for engaging with this really complicated totality that probably eclipses the total, you know, capacity of our mind to make sense of, or even our algorithms. So I see your recipes as ways to grapple with some of these biodiverse organisms. So if you could just share some of the ones that you decided to select for inclusion.
Well, so actually I can show you an image perhaps. I think you've been mentioning this, just one second. Let me share the screen. And then, yeah. I think you mentioned the list of viruses that was on the left-hand side of the image. So actually all these viruses is published by a scientific institution where they deal with the taxonomy of viruses. And this is the newest list that was published in 2019. And it contains almost 7,000 names of viruses. And these are including the ones that infect bacteria, yeast, human, all kinds of animals. So all the viruses that we know so far are on there. However, with all this like long list of names, we probably, as a person, a general person, you can only name a few. And the one that's been most popular in the past 1 year, the coronavirus, even the SARS virus that was like 18 years ago, and the one that we are encountering right now only consists as one name on this list. So they are not even, they are just a subgroup in here. So it doesn't have a name on that. And I think the presence of knowing that there are so many viruses here in the environment, and that's only a very tiny part of the whole viruses that exist in this world, actually creates a very interesting mindscape that you start to think, well, then what do they do? And by knowing that not just the plant viruses, but maybe only like more than half of the portion of the viruses that's on the list under the circumstance that we study the ones that may cause disease first, there are still more than half of them that are mutually beneficial for their host on this list. I think it says something because from the media perspective or like the general public's perspective, we only know maybe 10, 20 names on that. And those are all harmful. So that's how misunderstood that we know about viruses. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your questions.
Great. So we have a couple of questions stacking up. First, Rachel and then Kuriaki.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Pei. This is so great. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm just curious about the idea. I love how your work really fits in so well with some of the other folks who have come and presented their research before you as well. I mean, I'm thinking about Forrest's work last week, where he's talking about, the immensity of biodiversity in the virome and phages and what we don't know. And then certainly viruses as a process. John Dupre's work and Stephen Goodinger's work is coming out here so well as you speak about your work. And so I just love that. And I'm just wondering if you would say more expressly about making recipes. I mean, thinking that recipes are a process. Recipes are supposed to sort of sign. It's a sort of, in many ways, it's a highly controlled thing, depending on how you, depending on its use and depending on who's designing it. So I'm just so curious about the actual process of making or designing a recipe itself, and maybe just talking a little bit more about that genre of doing this and exploring these concepts through food and expressly through the sort of genre of recipe making.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think it would be nice to start with a bit of a history, very small part of it. So to put in recipes for me was quite intuitive. And reason why was that I think it was maybe 25 years ago, so I'm from Taiwan, and Taiwan had this, I think it's called foot and mouth disease with pigs. So what happens is that it has these bubbles, and then it also redness, and it kills the pigs as well. So it was quite a huge damage to the whole industry, and the Taiwanese were mainly pork eating community. Like, we don't eat that much of beef, it's always pork. And so then it was the government, I think, or some of the media starting to say, well, how do you identify if it's safe that you bought the meat from the market and then you can cook it? So they were asking people to pay attention to how it looked like, and saying that in which way can you cook them so it will be safe for eating. And then this same thing also happened, I think, in India when they had the flu, bird flu. And there were also, like, even the WHO has this regulation of how do you eat the birds or the chickens that are being infected by bird flu safely. And it was saying that you need to cook the meat to 75 degrees. So I would say my inspiration comes from there, but then it's sort of extended because I think biotechnology also gives us an immense ability to imagine how we can deal with other, like, all this, like, microbes and things. So I think when I'm designing the recipes, there's a mixture of all these conditions. Like, first, what is safe to eat? And then the second, to base on the current scientific research and the methodologies that we've been using the viruses in different biotechniques, biotechnologies, then how can we put something that's virus-based into the mouth of human? And then from there to see what kind of mechanisms does the viruses have with the person who eats it, or the food or animals and plants that are infected, then maybe those principles can become new recipes or ways of recipes. And I also have really, really good guidance from one of the virologists that I work with. She's a marine biologist. And I was asking her like, well, what does she think if I'm speculating a virus that doesn't exist, but then I want to put it into the recipe? And her comment was that try to stick to the scientific principles, because I think she was also mentioning that because she studies what's in the ocean and a lot of things that we actually don't know about it. So if you stick to the principles that we know, then perhaps one day we will discover something like that fits the characteristic. So that's also one of the elements. And then on the other hand, from the human perspective, I was also looking at the culinary culture. What kind of things people actually want to try as food, what kind of boundary we want to extend. So then there is one chapter that's really fun. I really enjoy writing that part, is the viruses as spice. So you can use viruses like a kind of spice where you add into food, but it causes you to have semi-sickness. But then at the same time, because the semi-sickness, that means your immune system is reacting to it, then you also get vaccinated. But then it's also based on the scientific research that there are scientists developing food-based vaccines that you can perhaps eat a fruit that has it is the vaccine itself. So I think it's a bit of like, I was looking at what's available and then to see if I bring another culture, like so I generally see science as a culture as well, and then you have the culinary culture. When you bring those two together, what are similar and what only make it a little slightly different, but then it also looks doable. So I think that's sort of my principle of designing these recipes. Yeah.
Interesting, thanks. Rachel, do you want to follow up, or we can go to the next
No,
question?
thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Maybe just on that point, to speak to a talk that's upcoming, the live attenuated polio virus was delivered on sugar cubes, and we have a scientist from the National Institutes of Health in the United States who's going to be speaking with us about the broad benefits of getting infected with a polio virus, a live attenuated one that seems to improve health and well-being across a number of different disorders. Kyriaki, you had a question.
Yeah, no, I'd like to maybe hear more about the experience of those in demonstrations actually eating the food, and understand more about the smell and the taste of your recipes. Could you describe a little bit more what has happened during the different exhibitions? Because in the videos it was hard to kind of understand exactly the sentiments that were, and the feelings and the smells and the taste of everything.
So maybe I'll see if I have, maybe I'll talk about it directly, because I have different recipes for the performance and for the cookbook. And for the performances, because I had a few live performances in different places, either in Netherlands or in Taiwan. And one of the recipe I really like was trying to have a jelly that simulates the smell of death of the algae. And then I was using the spirulina. It was like really strong, but it was used for mainly as a health food, I think, here in Europe. And then combined with the agar, which is also algae based. And for that, because for the live performance is a bit different from the cookbook. The cookbook goes more into how you make the process and what's the thought behind. But in the performance, I want it to have a more direct sense of what kind of possibility it might provide. So for that one, the dish was say that we use the virus to kill the algae. So you can have that kind of taste in your mouth that's similar to when you smell the waves, because the viruses kills a lot of algae in the ocean, and that's actually good because then that makes the resources able to circulate. They also make the bubbles that you see at the shore and the taste that comes with it. So with that dish, we try to, me and the chef, we try to simulate that kind of smell. And then there was another dish that's based on the potato virus. I think it was the potato virus Y or X that actually has the I don't remember the word, but that it kills a part of the potato so it becomes brown. It's the plant self immune system that they kill their own cells when they got infected. So you get areas in the potato that are like hard and tasteless. So that one, we used the smashed potato to mix with some beans that was baked already. And then it makes it baked, so it's also a bit crunchy, but it's a bit tasteless, but it has the different texture. And the texture, how I know about the texture was that I interviewed the farmers here who had experienced that kind of virus in the field and asked them, what do you think that tastes like? And then to use that to simulate it in the food. And I'm not sure how people would think about it, but then it's sort of like I was trying to simulate them, but also make it tasty, and then you can have a taste of it. And as for another dish that keep appearing in different places was the egg on rice. So it's based on a dish that's from Japan. So they put the raw egg on the rice and then you stir it and eat it. And the egg was because a lot of influenza vaccine was produced or researched using the chicken egg. And with that, because I want to create a placebo effect during eating, so it there are spice that's adding there like chilies, but a chili, well, when I was doing it in Europe, I will use it, the Sichuan chili, because people are not very familiar with it here. And so a lot of people eat it and it's like, oh, what is this? And really start to believe that viruses are entering their body and that makes them hot. But then that's also what makes you feel that way because of the spice. But then I skipped that dish in Taiwan because we are so familiar with that taste. So there's a lot of play of the real dish for the performance. Yeah.
No, this is absolutely fascinating. But like, did people actually feel sick, or did they feel well? I mean, this is what I wanted to also understand. Like,
that's something that was really, really fun. So during the performance in the Netherlands, there were some people who were like, yeah, I'm just eating, and then they eat so fast and they enjoy the dish itself, enjoy the story, and they were okay. But there were also people who eat and then stop halfway and being really afraid that there are really virus in there, even though I'm making it a bit ambiguous that, by logic, if you think about the food regulations, it's impossible to put real virus in there. But somehow, and I even intentionally made the context very strange, that I say I'm someone who traveled from the future and I bring you the dishes. And they start to eat and they really believe that there were viruses in there. So yeah, there were these kind of cases. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
So Savithi's got a question back on the 90%, but maybe before we get that, I want to bring you back to the opening question that I asked, which you mentioned like ipecac and also electrical shocks. And do you think, so from a future anterior, like imagining like a future when histories of virology might be one of just like elimination, right? We could be living in a future where our viral populations are impoverished, much like, there's some speculation that some disorders these days are a result of not having enough worms or bacteria in that. But I wonder if in the future there might also be a nostalgia for feelings of like unease or feelings of sickness. And is that what you were kind of getting at with these electrical shocks and the ipecac, or can you say more about like purposely inducing like feelings of nausea?
Well, I would say for that one, because it's the extension of my previous project. So for that one, I didn't think about that much of how we see it from the future because of nostalgia, but it was sort of a natural development because the previous project I was suggesting, it was before the corona pandemic, that I was suggesting that we have to really think about living with the virus and changing ourselves. By that, one of the because the topic was with norovirus that make you puke and diarrhea, and the roles of people who were trying to tame the virus, and in fact they were taming themselves, changing their own behavior to co-live with the virus, is that they can choose whether to be the virus hugger who try to get themselves sick all the time to get immunity, like how we understand herd immunity, political propaganda right now. Or they can become the kind that's more like a virologist who always being very aware of their movements and keep a distance with the virus. So if you are the kind of virus hugger, because the sickness is such a torture, you have to be mentally prepared. And so there comes the dishes that make you sick. And then I thought this notion was quite interesting because it's a bit strange, like if you already knew what's going to happen, the sickness becomes less scary. And so it goes under this context, and then I start to explore, well, there's the menu or recipes for the norovirus. Maybe it can be also for influenza and others. And that's why there are all this kind of electric shot to have this pain in abdomen, and then like the other ones that make you have a sore throat with the influenza. And that's also sort of trying to, based on what we have right now, like sometimes people eat things that make you extremely uncomfortable. For example, spicy hot pots, and or like having whiskey shots, or I know people would challenge themselves to drink 97% alcohol or things like that. So it sort of followed that track of challenging our limits of eating. But yeah, maybe it will become a way of nostalgia, although I'm not too sure, because the viruses also evolve with us, so maybe we will never be free from sickness. Yeah.
Great response. Santi, go ahead.
It's okay. We already talked a little bit about that. It's okay. I mean, I received some information, so thank you.
Let's see. I'm trying to look in the chat. I was counting on you, Sevi, to carry the conversation here.
Okay, I can still ask. Somehow, I was going to ask because Pei-Ying already mentioned this. Because when I read first 19% first, I was a little bit skeptical, because even with bacteria, we don't know most of the species. So for all the microbes, even we are recognizing and discovering this who cause the diseases. It's less than 1% actually. I talk about this raptum because I had to cite something for my article. So I was wondering, where did you get this 90%? Because when I first read, its virus is such a diverse and undiscovered area. Even with discovered one, I was just wondering, where did you get the number?
I think that's more of not a scientific fact, but more like a scientific speculation right now within the virologists. So probably there's no firm data. They were just like looking at, for example, with metagenomics and how much percentage there are the viruses genome and what maybe potentially be viruses, and to estimate that. So I can also look for if they have a paper writing about it. But I also, for this number, it's not used as a fact, but more like imagination that we speculate that exists. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Thank you.
Super interesting. And I mean, you can think about it also in terms of just like mutations. Like mutations can be functionally neutral, they can be beneficial to the host, or they can also be harmful. And the equation is constantly kind of changing. But one thing that I hadn't heard before today is that viruses are involved in placenta, like the formation of placentas for mammals. And do you have any other, fun viral facts? Like what other things are not common knowledge? How are viruses making us human? How are viruses making us mammals? I'd love to hear just more viral cultural natural history if you want to impart any of your knowledge.
Well, I think I'm not the expert on this, but there are some that came across. So with the placenta, the material I read, they mentioned that actually there's more than one occurrence of this viral genome in the mammals. Like I think this mutual existence or the insertion of this gene into the mammal's genome happened at least twice. And that's according to one of the mechanisms of these retroviruses, that they have the functionality to make the cell membranes to fuse together. And that's the formation of the placenta. But I can send you some more really scientific articles later. And there will also, maybe I'll show you one of the websites. There is this whole database researching the human endogenous viruses. I'll screen share. Wait. Just 1 second. Yeah, here, this database is really cool. That has all different kinds of human endogenous retroviruses. And some of them, if you look for these keywords or the viruses that are there, they all have different benefits for human. And I also know that the viruses that's related with placenta, even in human, there's more than one. So not just the one that makes you the placenta to form, but there are also the ones that suppress the immune system, so you won't attack the baby. Yeah. This is something really fun, but I think it's also quite a relatively new research area that's not very not very often seen at the moment. And for example, also the chickenpox virus is also something that once it affects you, then it keeps living in your body, and then you become a strange way of coexistence, and they come out when your immunity goes lower. So with human, these are the ones that I know. Yeah.
Super interesting. Yeah, and we discussed last week, Forrest Roker has written an early paper about the human virome, and really, yeah, it is just like it's such an embryonic field. We don't know much about what these viruses are doing to us. So we're about 5 minutes shy. Does anyone have one final question, or we could also go to the transition. I've got to be in another Zoom room in 5 minutes. Does anyone have any parting thoughts? Or Pei, do you have any parting thoughts about?
I actually have one very quick questions, but it's more cultural related. Because I think when I'm presenting it to the Asian crowd and more of the Western Christian kind of crowd, I know it's a very bad definition, but it's sort of like Western and Eastern. I think people sort of see it as a different way. And I'm quite curious about your perspective, that how do you see this cookbook? Is it feel like a natural development, or more of that I know because the latest years people started talking about the muted species engage with trouble or this kind of a perspective. And while I think the Asian perspective is slightly different, I mean, the result is similar, but the intention is a bit different. So I quite want to know, how do you see this? But I don't know the best way to ask.
No, it's great. For starters, I can't wait to see the whole cookbook published. So let's do a book launch once it's out with a publisher. And I think all these recipes you could read in terms of, Donna Haraway's companion species and also her, celebration of indigestion. Maybe celebration is the wrong word, but kind of like dwelling with indigestion, dwelling with the messy ways that species come together. Companion means, with bread. So she's trying to, the book When Species Meets ends on that pig feast, and we very much took inspiration from that, the multi-species salon, and coming up with our own recipes, including Caitlin Berggren's recipes for dandelion root tea and living with hepatitis C, but also some sourdough recipes. So I think we're working in a kindred register here, but maybe just throwing it back to you. You say it's a different kind of reception. You talked about how you had to cook differently for the European audience and the Taiwanese audience to invoke different things, given familiarities with tastes. So how would you say that the recipes were received differently in the Netherlands versus Taiwan?
I think when I'm presenting to the European crowds, most often I have to give them a reason why we're using it. But while in Taiwan, we have the culture of eating everything. So they were sort of like, yeah, why not just try it? And I think that mentality has this difference, like what is within the norm or what is not within the norm. And I wonder if it also engaged at the level of our definition of our own body's boundary, because food is something that you put into the mouth, but with the boundary itself, like, does knowing the scientific definition of that viruses, for example, they live in our genome, is it something that's really shocking for us, or for, say, the Western way of understanding human body? I guess my question is more related with this.
Yeah, let's keep having this conversation, and please come back to the reading group. It's really a pleasure to engage with your work. I hope to be able to, in the post-pandemic world, engage with it in a material way and eat it and curate it in shows. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
From all around the world. And apologies to everyone on this call and anyone who might be watching this on YouTube. For some reason, Google wouldn't let us send around links today in the regular Google group. So some people might have been trying to log on and weren't able to. We'll try to figure out those technical problems before next week. Rachel, do you want to do a plug for next week, since it's one of your colleagues from UCLA?
We're going to be joined by Bara Venkan, and he does work on tuberculosis and also antimicrobial resistance. So I haven't read the pieces that we're going to be circulating for next week yet, but that's his wheelhouse, and he's at UCLA Institute for Society and Genetics. So we'll look forward to chatting with him next week.
Thanks again, Rachel, and thanks, Pei. And maybe one final comment. I think, as a reader, you were asking how we were reading the recipes. Seeing the avian influenza recipe initially was like, oh, like, okay, is she deliberately trying to get us sick or something? But now hearing that history, that, there were specific regulations, that existed in Hong Kong and Taiwan and elsewhere as these diseases were experiencing outbreaks, like, here's how you cook your chicken. So it was really interesting to hear, that nested history of biopolitics, these different regulations that inform cooking. So thank you very much. I hope to collaborate in the future. This is a delightful project, so thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was a really nice discussion. Yes.
Yeah, great. Ciao.
Thanks,
All right,
Pei. Bye,
bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.